The Torchbearers crew were working their way through their third tower dungeon. In the center of the main room was a well. The murals on the wall gave them a pretty clear guide as to what to do, as well as a clear indication of what the consequences would be. The first showed a woman staring down a deep well. The second, the woman at the bottom of the well, pulling a sword from the ground. The third, a geyser of flames erupting from the well. And the fourth, the woman on her knees, screaming as black tentacles burst from her back. The party tied Ren Madarasi to a makeshift pulley and slowly lowered him into the well. As Ren descended, black hands burst from the walls of the well and grabbed at him, tearing his skin with their nails. He swung his short swords at the hands, but the sound only attracted more. Eventually, he reached the bottom, where a sword hilt lay, stuck into the ground. He pulled the sword, revealing that rather than a blade, the hilt was attached to a key. Then a geyser of fire blasted him out of the well, almost killing him. Fortunately, his sister was there to treat his wounds. Ren was able to do anything, as long as she was by his side, to be his strength. A few sessions later, she was dragged to the bottom of the sea, kidnapped by the Queen of the Depths. Ren was distraught, but he found a new reason to keep going. He would do anything to save his sister. Let's set that pathos to the side for a moment. The sword key opened the boss door, the party fought a snake thing that turned into a Medusa, and the door to the brazier room opened. The moment the door opened, both rogues sprinted towards it as fast as they could. Kit, with her monk levels, was fast, but Sean Stryker, the Tabaxi Hexblade swashbuckler, had the zoomies. This dash to be the first to the brazier room happened repeatedly throughout the campaign, because in that final room inevitably sat a chest full of loot, and the first person there naturally got first pick. Ren, Ripley, and Elbin caught up and focused on the actual plot. Ren cut his palm, dropping a few drops of blood into the unlit torch. As the flames erupted, briefly, he saw something. A pair of eyes staring back at him. Ren was unable to focus on this too much, because right behind him, the rogues were arguing over a pair of boots. "I was here first," Sean said. Yes, but you cannot wear boots. You're a tabaxi. You have, weird ankles." "I have weird ankles? Look at them. All angular and weird and shit." Ultimately, Kit got the boots while Sean settled for a bag of holding. I suppose this is as good of a time as any to properly introduce Sean Stryker, the only member of the party I haven't discussed in depth yet. Sean was born Shaman Stucker, a name he changed for obvious reasons. He grew up in Hemlock, a floating village of rafts, filled with poverty and squalor. As Sean's player put it, Hemlock was so boring that it forced him to be a chaotic little weirdo to starve off the boredom. Sean was a hexblade and carried around a ghostly, glowing katana that his mother had owned before she died. He called it Mother's Touch, and it dealt cold damage. It was cool. Get it? It was cool. So anyway, after the events of 10 Perfect Words, Captain James came to the party asking for a favor. One of the towers in the Rubicon territory, Glass Hour, hadn't sent out ships or responded to sending spells in a week. Fearing something was wrong, James sent the party to check it out. Late that night, the Depths Queen contacted Ren via his dreams. "Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was fire. Monstrous, all-consuming flames. And to put out this fire, the gods flooded the earth. I was born from this flood, chosen to bring order to these endless seas. I gave my power to 7 great sailors, one for each ocean, and tasked them with inflicting my will. When those men died, they were replaced. And when those replacements died, they too were replaced. As the latest pirate lord of the IRC, it falls to you to protect this region from chaos. There is a pest at Glass Hour Tower, a vile rat who threatens to tear this world in two. I ordered one of my men to fix this problem, but he only made things worse. Fixing this problem will be a good demonstration of your abilities. It might make me more willing to reunite you with your dear sister. Rand at this point in the campaign hadn't told the party about the Depths Queen. Thus, he kept his orders secret from them. Before the party went to Glass Hour, they decided to go shopping. Sean's player offhandedly mentioned that he wanted to buy a watch. Now, this excited me because I knew what was coming. So, with my best poker face, I said, "What? Sure, you can buy a watch." An old man selling magic items pulls up in, what's the word? Like a taco truck. A cart. He pulls up in actually no. He pulls up in a taco truck because I like that. He shouts, "Hey, I'm selling magic items. Anyone want to buy this watch? It runs off magic because gears don't exist yet. 20 gold or best offer." So anyway, the party sailed to Glass Hour. As they came close, they noticed something odd. The water was at low tide. This was odd because the rest of the surrounding ocean was at high tide. The wretched wench sailed over the line where the water dropped, and Elbin frantically worked to keep the boat afloat. As the boat reached the docks, Sean, on a whim, checked his watch. It was 12 p.m., noon, exactly. The party walked into the tower and everything was fine. When they asked people about the town going silent, they were confused. As far as they were concerned, they had been sending out ships. Now, sure, there had been that terrible accident at the research building 2 weeks ago, but things had been calm since then. The party met with the tower's governor in his mansion. The governor was a middle-aged elven man named Edwin Gremis. Gremis had long, straight black hair, dark eyes, and sharp, angular features. He sat in a large library, the curtains drawn, drinking a glass of what appeared to be red wine. "Again, I do not think anything bad has happened recently," said Gremis. "I spoke via sending spell with the Navy this morning. All of this must be a big misunderstanding. Really, I would recommend you sail back to the Navy and tell them this as soon as possible to sort out this mess." The party was suspicious, but they decided to continue on with their quest. The party decided to light the tower while they were there and asked Gremis where they could find the medallion key. Gremis directed them to the home of his assistant, a scientist named Dr. Whistler. As the party walked to Dr. Whistler's home, they ran into a strange jester by the name of Cicero Valentine. This was actually the second time they'd ran into Cicero. They'd first run into him 3 weeks earlier, while they were searching for the kidnapped children in Hemlock. Cicero was a treasure hunter who introduced himself by challenging people to draw from the deck of many. Kit rightfully regarded him as a creepy weirdo. "Oh, if it isn't my favorite adventurers! The one with the funny accent, the cat with the weird ankles, what a pleasant surprise! What are you doing here?" "Oh, just looking for some interesting artifacts. Nothing that concerns you." "Well, anyway, see you around," Cicero said as he walked off. The party decided to deal with that later. The crew opened the door to Dr. Whistler's house and found him lying on the ground, dead. The blood was still warm, but the killer was long gone. The party headed back to the governor's mansion to tell him what had happened. Along the way, they passed a flaming library and watched as the guards arrested an old man wearing a tinfoil hat. When the party arrived at the mansion, a massive hole had been punched through the wall, created as something heavy, Kool-Aid manned in. A hole covered the floor, revealing a secret basement. The party jumped into the darkness. The first thing they felt was the heat. Not the heat of the desert, the unmistakable heat of steam. Standing in the basement was a massive bronze warrior, shooting out blasts of steam from its valves as it charged at them. The party threw everything they had at the warrior, but its armor was too tough. The metal man grabbed Elbin with its pincers and pinned him against a wall. Elbin placed his hand on its arm, channeling a bolt of lightning through the automaton. This surge of electricity was enough to kill the metal monster. But the vice grip around Elbin's neck didn't loosen. Worse, the automaton began to glow, as steam built up uncontrollably within its chest. Elbin shouted for the party to run. The party, begrudgingly, did as their captain commanded. They climbed out of the basement as Elbin desperately tried to free himself. The automaton exploded before he got the chance. The explosion rocked the house. Ren ran to the edge of the pit and stared down. Then, something grabbed him, pulling him into the darkness. Kit and Sean ran. A figure clad in a black cloak stopped them before they reached the door. Kit watched as it cleaved Sean's head off with a single slice of its claws. With a second strike, it slashed her throat. She fell to her knees, blood pouring from her jugular. As she took her last breath, she saw a light coming from the basement. The cloaked figure turned back, whispering, "No." The light expanded, consuming Kit and the figure, consuming the entire mansion, consuming the entire tower. And then, the party was back at the docks. Sean checked his watch. 12 p.m. Noon. Exactly. The party, understanding what a time loop was, ran straight for Dr. Whistler's house. They burst through the door right as a woman wearing a welding mask attempted to decapitate him. The party kicked her ass and demanded answers. The woman introduced herself as Burke, the local blacksmith. She explained that 2 weeks ago, Dr. Whistler's lab blew up, destroying her smithy and killing her family. Dr. Whistler explained that he had been researching an artifact he'd found in the tower's dungeon, a crystal that could be used to rewind time by a few seconds. He'd been paid by a foreign financier to amplify the crystal's power. But the lab explosion wasn't his fault. He hadn't been at the lab that night. Someone else had snuck in, turned off the safety precautions, and powered up the crystal until the lab exploded. Afterwards, the crystal went missing. Burke explained that, despite the autopsies, her family weren't killed by the explosion. She'd seen the corpses. She'd seen the torn flesh. Over the course of a few loops, the party learned more and more about what was going on at Glass Hour. First, they learned that every loop, Cicero sets the library on fire before going to Gremis's mansion. Second, they spoke with a conspiracy theorist named Tim Hatt. He told them that Burke's family weren't the first deaths of that nature. There had been similar killings, one every few months for as long as he could remember. That Gremis's government had kept quiet. Third, they learned that at 12:45, a giant bronze sphere rolls out of the ocean into the tower, Bakugans into a steampunk robot, and breaks into the mansion. Finally, they learned that, no matter what, the light exploding from the mansion basement at 1 p.m. sent them back in time. As the party began Loop 4, they knew that the basement held the answers. After saving Whistler and the library, they blasted a hole in the floor and jumped down. They came across a thick metal door and spent several minutes slowly picking the locks. The door opened, revealing a dark hallway. The heavy footsteps shook the house, right on cue. Elbin told his crew to go ahead without him. He had a score to settle. As the automaton appeared at the top of the pit, Elbin struck it with a bolt of lightning. Angered, the metal warrior jumped down and charged at the sorcerer. Elbin took a step back into the hallway. The automaton, too big to fit through the doorway, couldn't reach him. Elbin smiled and unleashed his ultimate spell. Storm Sphere! Swirling winds and heavy rain surrounded the machine, as bolt after bolt of lightning burst from the ground to strike it. The automaton struck the doorframe with its claws, trying to tear through the foundation to get to Elbin before the lightning killed it. This time, Elbin was faster. The flurry of lightning tore through the automaton. Elbin slammed the heavy door shut on it, shielding himself from the steam explosion. Meanwhile, Kit, Ren, and Sean opened the door at the end of the hall, revealing a secret lab. Floating off the ground was a glowing blue crystal. Governor Gremis stood in front of the crystal, wearing a dark cloak, frantically casting spells on it. As the seconds ticked by, cracks spread across the crystal. Gremis turned to the party. "What on earth are you doing here?" "We're stuck in a time loop, and I'm gonna guess it's your fault." "No, this isn't... I was studying the crystal, yes, but I didn't do this. Cracks have been appearing. Cracks that threaten to destroy this entire tower, if not the world. What did you do?" "I did nothing. They just appeared, and I am unable to stop them from spreading. It's as if someone struck the crystal." Oh no. What? Another timeline. You said this was a loop? In an earlier loop, the crystal must have been damaged. That reset time by 1 hour, but the damage remained. In every possible timeline, the crystal is damaged. In every timeline, it drags us back. There is nothing I can do. As the clock approached 1, the crystal began to glow. Sean had an idea. He stepped forward and dumped out the contents of his bag of holding, wrapped the bag around the crystal, and stabbed it with Mother's touch. The contents of the bag, the crystal, were sent to the astral plane. The party held their breath. Sean pulled out his watch. 1:02 p.m. To be honest, that wasn't the solution I had planned, but seeing your players do things you'd never expect is what makes being a DM so fun. The party told Grimace to stop experimenting, lit Glass Hour Tower, obligatory murals here, and prepared to go back to adventuring. The thing is, Ren still had a rat to kill. He asked his favorite cat to help. Sean walked up to Cicero Valentine, who was standing outside the library and preparing to try again. He pulled out a deck of illusions he'd found in the dungeon and drew a card. The illusion card summoned a wizard who approached Cicero and threatened to kill him. Cicero drew his sword. Ren, from a nearby rooftop, fired 2 arrows, hitting Cicero in the heart and killing him. "Oh no!" Sean shouted. "The wizard cast summon arrows! I'll run after him and make sure he's brought to justice!" His first task from the Depths Queen complete, Ren headed back to the boat. Sean, a friend forged by fire, followed. Now you may be asking, what about the serial killer who murdered Burke's family? Well, Ren killed Cicero, and he was responsible for that, right? He burned down the library, he damaged the crystal in the original timeline, he probably killed all those people, including the party during their first loop. Right? Here's the thing. Burke's family were killed 2 weeks ago, except the tower was in a time loop for 1 week, so those deaths were 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Cicero was with the party in Hemlock. Yeah, the party never figured out the murder mystery. I mean, their players might have and not mentioned it, but the characters definitely did not put 2 and 2 together. I know this because later in the campaign, they met with the killer and no one brought up, "Hey, you're a serial killer." At the end of the campaign, the killer was still out there. So, who was the killer? Well, I've given you all the clues, dear viewer. Figure it out for yourself.